Imagine your entire life savings, everything you've ever worked for, just gone. Not over a lifetime, but in just a few months. Imagine needing a wheelbarrow, a literal wheelbarrow, full of cash just to go buy a loaf of bread. Now, this might sound like something out of a crazy movie, right? But it was the reality in Germany just about a century ago. We're about to dig into how this happened, and more importantly, the huge lesson it taught the entire world about the value of the money that's in our pockets right now.
So take a look at this. It's a German banknote. Back in 1922, it was worth 1,000 marks, a pretty decent amount of money. But look closer at that big red stamp. Just 1 year later, that exact same piece of paper was re-stamped to be worth 1 billion marks.
And that really is the central question here, isn't it? How does a country's money fall apart so fast that 1,000 of something becomes a billion? Well, the answer is a pretty terrifying story about war, debt, and a government that just completely lost the plot.
To really get our heads around this, we need to see just how surreal and, frankly, how chaotic life became at the very peak of this crisis in November of 1923. Words don't quite do it justice, but numbers can get us pretty close.
Okay, so what you're looking at here, this isn't some official government document. It's actually a medal. Kind of like a morbid souvenir, I guess, that was made to capture the sheer insanity of prices on one single day, November 1st, 1923. Let's see what it says.
So on that day, a single pound of bread cost 3 billion marks. A pound of meat, 36 billion. And even a simple glass of beer would set you back 4 billion marks. Things got so bad people were being paid twice a day, and they'd literally run to the store before their morning wages became worthless by dinner time.
And you can imagine, the entire social fabric just started to tear apart. The money was so devalued that people were literally using it as wallpaper or fuel for their stoves. It was actually cheaper than buying real wallpaper or wood. Banks just gave up on counting it and started weighing it by the ton. Some people reportedly developed this psychological condition called zero stroke, this compulsion to just write endless rows of zeros. And maybe most tragically, the entire life savings of the German middle class, everything they had in bonds and savings accounts, it just vanished. Poof, gone.
So, how on earth does a modern industrial nation get to this point? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was like a cascade of terrible decisions and awful circumstances that really started almost a decade earlier. It all kicks off in 1914. Germany decides to pay for the entire First World War not with taxes but with debt. Then, after losing, the Treaty of Versailles piles on these crippling war reparations. In 1921, the London Ultimatum makes things worse by demanding these payments in gold or foreign currency, and that's when the panic really starts. But the final knockout punch comes in 1923. Germany defaults, so French and Belgian troops occupy its industrial heartland. In response, the German government tells the workers to go on strike and then makes the fateful decision to pay them by just printing astronomical amounts of money.
And here you go. This is what that looks like. This graph shows how many paper marks it took to equal just one of the old pre-war gold marks. You can see it's kind of stable for a few years, then it creeps up, and then boom, in 1923 it just goes vertical. That line right there, that's the complete death of a currency.
At its absolute peak, this is the number that tells the whole story. 1 trillion. That is how many paper marks it took to equal the value of a single, solitary mark from before the war. A 1 trillion to 1 collapse. Just try to wrap your head around that.
You know, the famous economist John Maynard Keynes, he diagnosed the problem perfectly at the time. He saw that governments all over Europe, but especially in Germany, were just printing money to pay their bills because they were too timid or short-sighted to do the responsible thing, like raise taxes. It was the easy political choice, and it turned out to be the most devastating economic one.
The consequences of this whole collapse went way beyond economics. When you destroy the value of money, you destroy trust, you destroy stability, and you destroy faith in the system itself. And that creates a really fertile ground for extremism to grow.
The economic chaos just bred this social poison. You had a ruined, desperate public looking for someone to blame. Faith in the democratic government just shattered. Vile anti-Semitic rhetoric took hold. Some people even started calling the worthless banknotes Jew confetti. And it's this devastation, this complete wipeout of the middle class, that many historians argue directly paved the way for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party just a decade later.
So yeah, the Weimar hyperinflation wasn't just a German catastrophe that led to extremism. It became this brutal, unforgettable lesson for the entire world about the danger of letting short-term politics get its hands on a nation's money supply.
So what was the big takeaway from all this? If a government can't be trusted not to just print money to solve its immediate political problems, how do you stop them? How do you protect a country from its own government's worst impulses?
You are going to love this. Researchers at the World Bank used this wonderful analogy from the children's book Frog and Toad to explain the solution. Willpower is weak. If the cookies are right there in front of you, you're probably going to eat them. So what's the real solution? You have to create a system that puts the cookies out of easy reach.
And that, right there, is the entire idea behind what we now call central bank independence. It's the principle that the institution that controls the money supply has to be walled off from short-term political pressure. It is literally their job to put the cookie jar, that power to print endless money, on a very, very high shelf, far away from any politicians who might be tempted to raid it.
And how do you actually do that? Well, research points to a few key design features. You appoint the bank's leader for a really long term, so they outlast any single politician. You give them one main job written into law: keep prices stable. And here's the really crucial part. You create legal walls that stop the government from forcing the bank to print money to cover its spending, like forbidding the bank from buying debt directly from the government.
And this chart really shows why that separation is so vital. A government is always thinking about the next election, financing projects, winning votes, responding to the crisis of the day. That often means spending. An independent central bank, on the other hand, has a totally different, much longer-term priority: protecting the value of the currency for everybody. And that often means saying no. Their goals are just fundamentally in conflict.
The ghost of 1923 has never really left Germany, or the world for that matter. The memory of this disaster just fundamentally reshaped modern economics and the way we all think about the role of money. You can really tell the whole story in just these two pieces of paper. On the left, you've got a 50 million mark note, basically worthless garbage, and on the right, you've got the new stable Rentenmark that replaced trillions of the old ones. This was the return to sanity, and it was backed by a whole new commitment to fiscal discipline. And this national trauma had a lasting effect. To this very day, Germany's economic policy is famously, and you can totally understand why, focused on preventing inflation and maintaining a sound, stable currency. The memory of those wheelbarrows full of cash is very, very long.
Which kind of leaves us with one final question. 100 years have passed, but that tension is always there. The cookie jar is always tempting. So what really protects the money in your pocket? Is it the willpower of our leaders, or is it the strength of the institutions we've built to keep that jar on the highest possible shelf?